Hello and welcome to the Anomaly Project, the show that looks at all aspects of the paranormal and anomalous world. I'm Marcus Lowth, and joining me as he does every week is Steve Mera. Now, Steve, this week we're going to be looking at some archaeology, forbidden archaeology, possibly some Knights Templar stuff. It's going to be another enthralling show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's always a thrilling show with Mark's around. Like I say, people shouldn't underestimate Mark. Not only is he quite professional in regarding his filming, and that's the thing to myself. Everybody goes and learns stuff and filming and projects and stuff, and they think they know it all. Then Mark comes along and shows them how to do it right. You know, and I've seen this a few times myself. But you know what? It's always interesting. And even if you just call for a cup of coffee, it's never a normal thing, is it? It's just like, wow, you come back with like, wow, what have I just heard? But yeah, it's going to be an enthralling show for sure.
Excellent stuff. It really is. So, I mean, tonight our guest is researcher, archaeologist, and lecturer Mark Olly. Now, Mark, first of all, thanks very much for joining us. How are you doing first?
Not bad at all. Being held up in my various jobs by the weather, which affects everything, and I believe we've got a real cold spell coming in. So, at the moment, I'm just kind of, I'm literally chilling. I'm just in a gap, you know.
You're in the gap.
When I say that, though, I mean Steve knows there's
There is no
always
gap.
something. There are any gaps, it just
Yeah, I can
rolls
imagine.
one thing into another.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of leads me into where I think we should start this, actually. I mean,
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you had a background in music as a professional musician and music management and things of that nature before you found yourself in the world of archaeology and ancient mysteries. So, how did that journey come about? Because it is quite unique, I think.
Right. I'll try and keep this as brief as humanly
Oh, you
possible.
go.
My dad was a volunteer digger. So when I was 8 years old, he took me on a dig, dumped me in a hole with a trowel, and went, off you go. So that's really the start of my archaeology. Back in the 1970s, when, there weren't such things as professional archaeologists to speak of. So I started then, but at the same time as that, I'd also been playing the drums since I was 3 years old. So when I ended up going off to art college, at this point I'm a teenager, I'm doing a lot of archaeology. Warrington's Art College is immediately opposite the museum. So I used to come out of the art college at the end of the day and go and study with Liverpool University in the museum opposite. All that's ticking along very nicely. Then we have the big upheaval with, the change in politics with Thatcher in 1980. And I just went, right, stuff all this. I'm going off in the music business. And basically, I went off 1980, got 4 record deals, did session drumming with 60 plus bands. I did that for 21 years till eventually my body gave out, my back collapsed, and I thought, what can I do? Let's go back to archaeology. Because I never really gave that up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If somebody said, what do I do? I'd say I'm an archaeologist. If somebody says, what are you? I'm actually a drummer. That's what I am. My DNA is as a drummer. But the two have gone hand in hand. Never really gave it up at any point, really, in the time I've been around. Finished up with a production company, as Steve mentioned at the beginning, Mythco, which is
Yeah.
still kicking around in the wings. We managed to survive what happened in 2020, 2021, and we're still around. So, and I'm still doing music. I'm still in a band. I'm still doing
Right.
archaeology. I'm, still filming and what have you. And life goes on. So yeah, I've had a fairly interesting, I've done it all over the world. I've done it in lots of different places in so many different ways. And but Michael, I'm telling you the plot. It's one of those moments.
Well, there's only
No,
three. There's only three things in the universe that never change: taxes, death, and Mark Ollie's word.
Yeah,
You know?
there you go.
no, I mean, it is. It's a unique journey. I mean, so
It
that kind
is.
of leads me into saying, I mean, first of all, I do find it interesting the amount of musicians that have an interest in this kind of stuff. I mean, we've spoken to loads of people who, one way or another have connections in both worlds. But I mean, what particularly about you mentioned that you just got dumped in an hole by your dad, but as
Yeah.
you grew and got older, what really drew you into archaeology? I mean, it sounds like a silly question because obviously you want to know about the past, but what was it that really kind of got you? And I really want to get into this.
Okay. I think most archaeologists would agree that either you are interested in finding something and discovering something, or you are then interested in what then happens next. In other words, the research, the documentation, and that side of it. For me, the chase was always better than the catch. I am at heart a digger, a researcher, a finder, an explorer. down holes, in tunnels, into derelict buildings. That's kind of it's in the family as well, because my mum and dad were in the antiques trade many years ago. One as a jeweler, the other as a furniture restorer. So this idea of going out to find something, once you'd found it, you tended to either, in the case of them, with antiques, they'd sell it on. In my case, I'd pass that information or that discovery on to, somebody else to process that and communicate it. But as time went on, I've become more of a communicator, I think. But for me, the chase is better than the catch. I am at heart an explorer, a discoverer.
Yeah,
Still
absolutely.
doing it. Yeah.
I think I'm in good company.
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on things like, obviously there's still things to be discovered. It's not like, we discovered everything. Like, they say, for example, 90% of what's left from the ancient Egyptian civilization is still buried under sand and things of that nature. So do you think, how do you think that we are going to see some, and I'm careful how I word this, some mind-blowing discoveries? Because they happen every day, I'm sure, but you understand what I'm saying, where on a global nature it's going to be like, wow, we can't believe we found this. Do you think we'll ever know about it? I mean, are these sort of things hidden away, or is that all conspiracy nonsense?
Oh no, it's definitely not conspiracy. I'll take, for example, the world of metal detecting. On average, the metal detectorists are hitting something that qualifies as a hoard. So you're talking about treasure, gold and silver and all that sort of stuff, and ancient metals. They're hitting stuff on average, big hoards, about once every 2 or 3 years. Now, if you then explode that across the globe, across all different aspects of archaeology, I'd say that's a pretty fair average. Every couple of years, something really big, a big treasure, a big discovery, some new technology, whatever, will come forward. So, you're never going to go more than about, 24 to 36 months without something breaking the news, and it does happen all the time. And you've also got to bear in mind there are probably now, I won't say millions, but certainly many, many thousands of people that are involved in the archaeology and history industry that are doing it all the time, flat out, and there's discoveries in progress. There's things ticking over that take months to arrive at the end of. Everything from translating the Dead Sea Scrolls to running tests in laboratories and flying satellites over the jungle to find sites. It goes on 24/7 all over the globe. So I suppose the answer to the question is I don't think we'll ever get to the end of it.
No, because they're still discovering it, and of course they're still trying to work out what they've discovered half the time whilst they're discovering. So it kind of never ends. I mean, if you, for instance, the Dead Sea Scrolls, how much of the Dead Sea Scrolls how are we privy to see, which is out there, and how much actually still remains to be done and sorted? It's like cuneiform tablets from Samaria. I mean, there's so many of them. They'll be transcribing these and interpreting what they're saying for countless years, so, and then they'll probably find another hoard because, there's just so many of them. But since last time I talked to you, there's been a couple of interesting things that appeared over the internet, and one of them, which stands out to me, which I wanted to always ask you, never got actually a chance to, was we had all this stuff coming out, this hype over what lies under the Egyptian pyramids and this SARS radar system and all the lovely photos and images and things of what looked to be large columns and stuff. I was kind of, okay, well, we live in a world of, is it or isn't it sort of thing now, isn't it, Mark? So what was your take on that sort of thing?
When I first heard it, I was probably as excited as everybody else. And I thought, yes, at last, mostly because the Egyptian Antiquities Department are incredibly difficult to get information out of. Yeah. And I'm like, yes, somebody's done something now to get some new information. But I'm also a qualified geologist. So I started looking at the images as the images were coming in. And I'm thinking, it's how can I put it? It's too big for it to be part of the archaeology, but it's not too big to be part of the geology. And literally, I'm a kind of a shoot it to duck man, and until somebody actually digs a hole,
exactly,
and breaks through into something, or until Zioas and the rest of his guys come out and say, "Yeah, we've done it, we found it," till something like that happens,
totally
as you rightly say, we've got a lot of very nice, interesting bits of radar. Since then, actually, there's been some radar done on other, like the Bolivian pyramids and one or two of the others. They've done a similar thing, and there's a massive row breaking out now as to whether it's valid or not. Nobody's come down on either side of the fence yet.
It seems to have fallen a little quiet after all that. And I often think to myself, I really hope that it isn't just one of these things that just dies a death and disappears. But you do tend to get this. All of a sudden, then the world is going hyping mad about this, and then next minute is like, what? Everybody's asking, well, what happened with that? What was? I don't know.
Yeah. It's almost like somebody has a story. They write a story, and it has a beginning, a middle, and then no end.
Yeah.
That's just so frustrating.
It is very frustrating.
I mean, Matt, just sticking with the pyramids, can I just get your thoughts on this, specifically with the pyramids of Giza? Mainstream Egyptology, for want of a better phrasing, would tell you that the tombs and that's all they are. What are your thoughts on proposals, specifically like Christopher Dunn's, for example, that they've got some kind of power generator, some kind of power station? I know some people leapt on that gap under the pyramids and said, well, this is water that's coming in to help power this stuff. And I know there's been, like you said, there's similar discoveries on the pyramids. So should we give those kind of things credence? Is it possible, or do you think they're just nothing but tombs?
Well, let me say I've been in it. I've actually been in the Great Pyramid of Cheops. Yeah. I've spent an hour in there with all the lights off playing musical instruments, which is like unheard of. So I can talk a great deal about what it does acoustically. And I personally think that there are layers. It's a layered monument where you could just go down the route. Well, it's a tomb because it's got a coffin in it. Well, that doesn't scan with the evidence, really, because we can't even work out how they built the thing and how they got the coffin in there in the first place. And also, even if you're an expert in Egyptian religion, you've still got that shaft that points off to Sirius, which is the dog star, the middle star at Orion's belt. You've still got that, and that's a complete mystery how on earth they managed to line that thing up. And it's not the only one. There are other shafts going off, and there's other bits and bobs with it. Then you've got the idea that somehow it represents part of a star map, which in that is a story with an end. The whole of Egypt seems to mirror what is up in the heavens one way or another. It's almost like the Milky Way, spread out on the desert. So you've got all these different layers. Then I'm old enough to remember them selling pyramids to sharpen razor blades in the 1970s.
Yes, do you remember that? I remember.
Yeah, the little tiny.
And they even had a thing which is a little bit bigger, which you could put your fruit in because the fruit would last longer in there. Do you remember?
Yes. Now that's another aspect of it. So what's going on there? There was a photo came up fairly recently, which I have seen before, taken from above the pyramid, where it's not got 4 sides, it's got 8. Yeah. It's split into, and then you start thinking, okay, well, we know the edges are curved to within, a few centimeters, and we know that it's positioned and it's aligned. And honestly, just the mathematics in that alone, the Victorians were onto that. They knew that there was something mathematically special about the pyramid. But now, with all the technology we've got, the mathematics of it have just exploded. What you're looking at really is a computer in stone. There's no other way of describing it. Yeah. And it does something. It functions. It definitely does something. Things plural, actually. It does a number of things. So I'm never going to say any of the theories are not true, because most of them are not just theories. There's evidence. In fact, there's proof like for sharpening razor blades, for serving fruit, etc. And having been in there, I've been in a lot of buildings. I must have been in thousands of buildings over the years, and there's nothing else like it. There's nothing else on planet Earth that is quite like the Great Pyramid of Cheops. It's just odd. It's odd in so many ways. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with it now. I think it is a superstructure. It's an incredible, like I say, computer in stone. Every aspect of it, no matter how you look at it, is exceptional.
Maybe that the Egyptian government don't want to give up the secrets. The most of the income comes into that country is through tourism. Why would they really want to give up the secrets? Maybe, I don't know. Everything seems to be built around tourism for Egypt, of course.
You've got to be careful from an archaeological point of view, because when we had lockdown, if you have a look at the satellite images of Egypt prior to lockdown, sort of 1819, that sort of, everywhere's intact. But then you go like 1920, 21, you get to 22, and the tomb robbery, the destruction is off the Richter scale.
Yeah.
And that is primarily the number one reason why we don't hear anything. Because if somebody says, hey, we found this fabulous tomb, a week later it'll have just been gutted and everything stolen, and it is a genuine problem out there. When I was out there, I worked with a guy whose family had looked after the pyramids of Giza for about 35 years, a guy called Fagani. I got really close to him, we got chatting, and honestly, the stories he was telling me, archaeologically, it makes your toes curl. But that's, that goes all the way back to the French, back in the Napoleon's day, early 1800s, they sacked Egypt. It's just one wave of desecration after another. So you can kind of sympathize with them being a little bit hesitant now,
I can understand.
Yeah,
I totally get it.
I mean, there were reports, weren't there? I mean, in Egypt as well, and you've probably heard of those. And also, I think during the Afghan War, the Second Gulf War, I guess we should say, of looting. But there was reports of actual organized looters, and it was suggested that these were like kind of some secret ops. But when listening to you speak there, it almost makes you think they're almost getting in there and getting this stuff out of there, so it isn't actually looted. So I don't know, but I mean, you must have heard of those kind of things where this looting, like you say, it's very real.
Oh, yeah.
It's very, very organized as well. It's not chances.
During wars in places like Iran and Iraq, Babylon was sacked, sites were blown up, museums were gutted. Honestly, it's been a real struggle within the world of antiquities and the world of archaeology. It's been a struggle to try and sort all of that out. That's why it's so difficult now to send anything to auction without provenance, because they want to know absolutely where stuff's come from, that it hasn't been stolen. And it's difficult. I mean, my mum and dad were collectors, so I've got bits and bobs they picked up off car boots and all sorts that are knocking around the house, but I'll never be able to sell them because that's just not the done thing. It's not the done thing.
No, I mean, it's happening. It happens all over the world in regarding ancient antiquities. And this is why there's such a large black market.
Yeah,
these, and as when you worked with me on the Peruvian Indian mummies, and all these years we still stood fast with this, no matter still pumping them out, still making them, and there's so much BS going on regarding these, and I'm tired of responding to people, so I just don't do it anymore. People want to believe it, fine, that's okay, but you did some incredible work in identifying what I did suspect, but I needed it. I needed you basically to turn around and say, am I right? I'm thinking, could it be? And of course, you looked at it and you went, that's off it's an animal skull, but it's been manipulated.
Yeah.
Like, what? This isn't an alien mummy?
No, it was a dog skull with a nose cut off.
Exactly.
And I nipped in the other room and got you one to have a look at.
Exactly. The world doesn't want to hear that, do they? No. The world want to say, oh, well, we want to hear that it's an alien. And this is what we're up against, Mark, isn't it? Is that people want to believe this so much. And you think, God, well, you've got to be able to call it for what it is, haven't you? At the end of the day.
Yeah, it's almost like the conspiracy actually is almost like a flip. It's like a double lie, because if they put a load of stuff out and all the stuff they're putting out draws lots of attention, I mean, this is generally right across the board, and everybody focuses on it, and it turns out not to be real. That doesn't mean that there isn't something out there that is
exactly
real.
That's
but
what
they don't want you to see that.
It almost makes you doubt those other accounts. The fact that one thing,
it doesn't help the situation. But there's a lot of money it's involved with these. Millions. I mean, Maria, the money was down on the black market for $1 million. And you just think to yourself, I wonder if someone's daft enough to actually go and buy that.
Well, have you seen the latest X-rays? They've got one now, a sort of seated one that's in the Peruvian position that apparently has a baby inside it.
Yeah.
And exotic metal. Oh, I can tell you a lot about exotic metal, but I bet you there's none in that mummy.
It's a real problem. I mean, but we mentioned Peru there, and obviously there's pyramids and stuff all over South America, all over the world. Clearly there's probably more to be discovered. So just going off what you were talking about how special these buildings appear to be, the orgon thing, I remember they were saying that pyramids, things grow better inside these structures and blah, blah. It just goes on and on and on. So do you feel that might hint the fact that these pyramids were all over the globe, slightly different, but essentially still pyramids? you think that hints at some kind of global civilization or global knowledge or transfer of civilization, even if it was antediluvian or something of that nature? Or do you think, again, is that too much of a reach? What are your thoughts? What's your research tell you?
Well, the shortest answer is yes. Yes, because the more that I've travelled and the more that I've sort of literally metaphorically dug, the more that the pyramids are now no longer unique. Yes, they're everywhere. I mean, literally, we've got them here. We had them here in Wales. You know, we had them everywhere. Had them all over the world. The biggest ones at Siam in China. You know, for the Pyramid of the Emperor and all stuff like that. They're everywhere. So that is a very, very clear, universal, human, you know, multicultural message that's telling you that that is everywhere. But then you start to find out that windows are the same, doors are the same, the building methods are the same, the giant blocks are the same. You know, that logic is everywhere. But it goes right down to fairly small detail. You know, there's copper all over the world, there's iron all over the world that's been traded from places that it shouldn't have come from. There's the stretched head culture, these people with the enormous elongated skulls. It's not just the Paracas, they're in every country. They're all over the place, from the Huns of Russia right the way down to the Aborigines of Australia. They're everywhere. You know, writing, the origins of writing, the origins of mathematics, the origins of astronomy and astrology, you know. And once you start digging, you suddenly discover that everybody everywhere has all the same information. You know, it's like a starting block. So you could go either way. You could say either, you know, once upon a time there was a superculture, Atlantis, it disappeared under the waves, everybody scattered, or you could go the opposite way, which as a geologist, actually, I'm kind of leaning towards massive supercontinent, something, you know, like Fangia or Mu or whatever, gets a meteorite, bang in the middle, and everybody floats away from each other. Continental drift. So the only thing there that's going to, people are going to go, oh, you can't say that. The only thing is the time scales involved, you know. But I mean, my argument with geology has always been the same. You know, somebody comes along and goes, well, this meteorite, you know, hit the Earth 66 million years ago. Well, you may as well have just gone, this meteorite hit the Earth banana, because I've got absolutely no idea what 66 million years looks like. You know what I mean?
No.
Once you get past a few thousand, I mean, when you get to Göbekli Tepe, where you're looking at 12, 13,000 BC, that's like, yeah, all right, I can cope with that. And there's a timeline and something that the brain can deal with. But, you know, 110 million years, well, what's that? What does that mean?
Yeah,
you know,
astronomical, isn't it? I mean, just that date you mentioned about Göbekli Tepe and 12,000 years ago, which is about 10,000 BC. That you'll know this. Obviously, there's loads of people, Hancock included, I believe, as well in this, that said that there was a cataclysmic event at that time, somewhere around that time. So, again, do you think those suggestions have more weight than not? Because, you know, loads of different people are coming to the same conclusions, aren't they?
Yes, and there's more discoveries being made. I was looking today at a geological report for the bottom of the ocean, where there's a 9 kilometre wide crater that has just been discovered under the layers of mud at the bottom of one of the oceans. Well, that's huge. That's enormous, because that's another. It's, you know, the Younger Dryas event where they have the Gulf of Mexico and, you know, 66 million years, big, you know, meteorites, etc. It looks like there were two of them, you know, which is pretty. There's another big one as well, supposedly under Antarctica, which they found when they did the geological survey. So, you know, us getting smacked by objects, you know, is not as quite as rare as we'd like to think, you know. So the idea of some kind of cataclysmic event, you know, that upset the balance round about between, say, 10 and 12,000 BC, that's perfectly acceptable. And then, of course, you've got to throw other things in as well. Like, you know, what happens with the Ring of Fire, the volcanoes? What happens when they go, you know, everything? It's a nuclear winter. Everything gets blacked out. The last one was in 1815. You couldn't see the hand in front of your face for 2 years. You know, crops failed, people starved. We had the worst winter. The Thames froze. That's just a volcano. You know, it's not. It's not a, you know, something the size of Manhattan smacking into the earth. It's, you know, and these things apparently must have gone on a lot,
you
know, on and off.
I think there's cycles. I think there's certainly cycles of events, and we can see sort of. I mean, I've been to a lot of high ground in other countries, and you see what looks to be like silt and shells and things, and they're on top of a mountain and stuff.
Well, it's like what is it, the Matterhorn? They've got fossilized sea creatures on top of that. So it doesn't mean they lived up there. It doesn't mean the sea was that high. It just means when whatever it was happened, it pushed everything up,
thrown everything up. You know,
changed all the
there's a
geology.
place in Turkey. I don't know if it was Turkey or Russia, so I apologise for that, where they literally found they thought it was some kind of ritual sacrificial cave, just bones piled in. And when the more they dug, they realised they weren't piled in; they'd been forced in there. And obviously, that had only been by a flood. So, what fascinates me about the idea of a cataclysmic event, particularly if it was a meteorite or comet that came from the skies, is that would almost explain. And I know I'm reaching a little bit here, but it almost explain why people in antiquity were obsessed with the skies, and not just the skies, but the movement of the stars. It's almost like some kind of warning filtered down to the survivors. And so, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that might explain why they had such great knowledge of the stars, even back then?
Well, take out all our technology, just eliminate it all, and all you're left with is the natural environment. So absolutely everything, from your eclipses and your comets and your cataclysms down to the basics, like, where are we in the year? What time is it? Where do we plant our food? How do we know which direction to sail? You name it. All of that is based on what's going on in the sky, all of it. So we're looking at things through 21st century eyes, really. We shouldn't be going downward and saying what's going on the earth, what is our technology, what's happening, etc. We ought to be looking skyward. And as an archaeologist, all the prehistoric sites, every single site without fail, is aimed skyward in one way or another. Solstices, etc., sunrise, moonrise. They were obsessed with it, but that's because that was the rhythm of life.
Right. It was their TV, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And as I'm getting older, I wish that was still the rhythm of life.
Same here, actually.
We've imposed our technology and what we do on the planet, and that's why it's been lost. So it's not really a mystery. It's like it's there in plain sight. You just have to join the dots.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts on off the back of that? We were speaking about how we've kind of reached this modern almost pinnacle where you can see us going one way or another collectively. But I mean, just taking the legends of Atlantis, for example, and other researchers and their speculations, do you feel that if there was a civilization that was global and existed on Earth, do you think they were technological? Not necessarily as technological as we are, but certainly possibly. And do you feel that might have led to the downfall? Like you say, if something like that happened today, even if a solar flare took out our electrical circuits globally, we'd be finished in a matter of days, realistically, because we rely on this stuff. And so, what are your thoughts? Do you think the technological civilization could have existed before the event?
Well, there's two things there. The first thing is the only survivors in that cataclysm would be archaeologists and reenactors, because we know what to do. Right. That's the first comment. But I think they had a lot of the technology back then, if not more technology, because we're discovering or rediscovering things all the time. I think they were aware of almost everything that we're aware of nowadays, but chose to do something different with it. We've lost the element of choice. As soon as we get hold of it, we're like, kids in a sweet shop. We just go mental. A great example of that is the atomic bomb. Fabulous idea. Great. Let's bomb this, that, and the other. And 360 bomb tests later, the whole planet's glowing like goodness knows what, and everything that's on it. And I'm pretty sure. I mean, there's that site in India, in southern India, where everybody's been, blasted and turned to glass by an aerial burst that appears to be atomic. Or maybe some bloke in his garden shed suddenly decided to experiment with it. It went horribly wrong, and then everybody's gone, right, we're not doing that again. That's a bad idea,
Little things pop up from time to time which don't fit. And you think like ancient computers, and you think, what the hell is that? You talk about the evidence of machine marks on cut stone. I mean, even some of them up to a saw size in Egypt, they've seen the revolution on the cut stone, a 32-foot saw. And you just think, what the hell? I mean,
but what about the holes that are bored all the way through flipping half a mountain? How you can't get a drill bit that long.
True, you're absolutely right. And I think people get the wrong idea. They think people were dumb back in ancient times because they built things out of stone. No, they just did things differently, but they were damn clever, because we have to sometimes go back in time to learn something about how they were doing it.
Yeah, like electricity and gliders in Egypt and all, the Antikythera mechanism in Greece. And, the list just goes on. There's an endless list of old technologies like that. I mean, the Greeks in particular, they used to teach Greek in schools, and it's a shame they stopped, because the Greeks, some of the things they came up with, honestly, It just puts some of these
Indeed.
modern inventions to shame, and they didn't have the things to work with that we've got. But then you do get the feeling, going back to what we were saying earlier, that there was something before them, and
Yeah,
then
maybe.
something again before that, and then so on going back. So they're
Yeah,
standing on the shoulders of
I totally
giants.
agree with that. I think it's very easy to lose
Yeah,
history if some type of catastrophe was to happen in modern day now. I mean, I can't build a rocket. I don't know if you can. And if nobody survives that knows how to build a rocket, it's lost technology,
yeah,
Oh yeah,
you know.
I
And
think the
then
yeah.
things.
one day we'd look at the moon and go, "What's all this?
Yeah,
There's things left on the moon. What's going
I
on?"
think the thing to mention here, really, and it kind of it almost lends credence to the question: could civilizations have existed long before, perhaps millions of years? Is if anything did happen to us today. Firstly, even if you had survivors, the chances that they would know how to work any technology that remained would be slim. So that's kind of out.
Mm.
But more than that, the only thing that would survive over thousands and thousands and thousands of years would be stone. So
Yeah,
essentially, all that would survive would be what is already to us ancient monuments. Essentially, everything we don't build in stone anymore, so that would just crumble. So let's assume that happened, and either through straggling survivors or through life just starting again. However, they would then think that they were the first. They were the first civilization because there'd be no trace of us. So
No.
it's not inconceivable that that's happened like you say, multiple times before. Really, So, as do you think mainstream archaeology? I know it's not just archaeology in this; it's a whole field of interest. But do you think they'll ever embrace such possibilities, even just to ask the question in a serious way, even if they're not willing to give an answer?
it just takes time. The thing with archaeology is that there used to be an old rule, and it's been there hundreds of years, that you can't destroy somebody else's career until they're dead.
Right.
So that has held everything up for generations
Yeah.
because you can't contradict or publish against or and I can see where that's coming from because that's in all aspects of
Yeah.
theologies and what have you, theists. You can't do it, but then that has held things up. And then all of a sudden somebody discovers something and it changes things. So I think the key to that, the key to the answer to that is not to resist change. Everybody with any kind of qualification or any position or any standing in academia will resist change,
Yeah.
and that's in itself, that is a massive fault. It's holding everything and everybody back.
And that's so obvious as well sometimes. I
Oh,
mean, even if you just look at the acceptance of giants that lived on planet
yeah,
Earth, they're everywhere. So they've got the skulls. They can
yeah.
see they've got skulls, giant skulls. They've got two sets of rows of teeth, some of these. They've got extra digits, some of these things. And they're huge. And you think to yourself, why? Smithsonian Institute was probably responsible for trying get rid of these things. Look, they collected them, got them out of the way to the point where there's so many of them, we don't know where to put the damn thing. So I tell you what, let's transport it here and dump it over the boat at sea. And, the thing is too much information out there. And people have just resided now to the point where, yeah, we know that they exist. And, something was doing something because I don't know what all these giants where they suddenly come from, but it doesn't fit into the mainstream aspect of how humanity has grown and evolution and all that sort of thing. So let's not have it. That's the problem with these today. People know stuff and
Mm.
believe stuff, and probably is evidential, but still they won't even admit it on an official capacity. That's crazy.
It's like when they discovered the Hobbit people, the Floors, Homo floresiensis on Floors Island. Oh,
Yes.
look, we've got a whole race of people who, at adulthood, they're only like 3'4", 3'6" tall.
Mm.
Okay, well, DNA wise and all the rest of it, that was accepted because that was an academic discovery. Well, hang on a minute. We are a species like all the other species. So if you can have a cat in the jungle, the palm cat that will sit in the palm of your hand, and yet you can cross a lion with a tiger and get a liger the size of a horse. Why can't you have the same thing in humans?
Mm.
There must have been tiny little people, and there must have been enormous giant people as well. And this idea of they're calling it the Lord of the Rings world. This idea of super diversity in the human species that has now finally taken root. I think people are beginning to take that seriously, which is very slowly prizing open the door to giants. It is slowly
It is.
creeping in.
Yeah.
I'm dying to see in my lifetime what other evidence pops up, in that
They seem to
respect.
be all over the world, though. It does seem to be
Yes,
evidence of them, doesn't they? And some
yeah,
of them have been clearly put out as this is what we've discovered and this is evidence, and he's just sort of shaking your head saying, well, okay, you've got these scientific teams and saying this, but then officially they don't really exist.
yeah,
Yeah, it
yeah,
will come out. I mean, just with that in mind, though, about giants there, and like you say, like little people, or however, they're named in various different ways, as you know. What about legends and folklore, and even biblical and ancient writings? They all speak of these things, and people say, they pass them off as stories and blah 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 blah. But there's often hidden truths in this kind of thing, and particularly with religious writings, you could almost say twisted truths. Where they've taken something and just made it mean something completely different, but do you think we'll find more clues in folklore and legends and mythology as to what was actually going on back then?
Well, it was an enormous thing in the 70s and 80s to really get stuck into myths and legends at that point. I think there was a lot of headway made. It kind of fizzled out a bit in the 90s. People were looking at other things, and now it's gone a little bit more technologically based. But in my own personal experience, because I've studied a huge number of texts over the years, there's always a kernel of truth in there somewhere. And a good example, I was watching Alice Roberts talking about, the discovery of the original site of Stonehenge up in the mountains of Wales. It was on TV yesterday, and I'm just watching it. And she kicked off by saying, and there's a legend that Merlin went away to the lands of the West, and brought these from, another land. She said island, because that's what the legend says, island, Irish, and that he flew them to Salisbury Plain. Well, that's a medieval legend, but it's a medieval southern memory bolted onto King Arthur. The characters are taken from North Wales. But it was right. Somebody actually did transport alien stones from the lands to the West, but it was on the BBC. I'm thinking, now we're getting somewhere. Now it's in mainstream. They're actually being honest about the kernels of truth that appear in legends.
I'm glad of that, because
Yeah, that was on last night.
Too long it's been static for, and of course it's like anything. It's like the national curriculum is at school. What to children, they're given what they're told to teach, so they teach it, and it's accurate for that time.
Yeah,
and then the next curriculum comes in, and they feel like, oh, hang on a second, it's all gone that because it was wrong. Good science is supposed to evolve, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. Science actually is not supposed to be static. It's not supposed to have fixed conclusions. We're lucky in archaeology, because I suppose you could call archaeology a science. At least we end up with an object. So, at the end of the day, whatever it is, the object is paramount. That is your evidence. That is everything. So at least we finish up with something. But some parts of science, some elements of science, you can't do that. It's intangible. How on earth you nail anything down at CERN is beyond me. That just to go off into all sorts of things, particles, dimensions, light, wavelengths, frequencies, you name it, and it's all intangible. In terms of end product.
Yeah,
It'd be nice to actually do a documentary on that and piece together all the discoveries they've made and try and understand what they're actually doing. I bet there's a few people at CERN are not really sure what they're doing either.
Sure there is, actually.
Mind-blowing stuff. Certainly mind-blowing stuff out there. I mean, we're talking about tangible and intangible. We mentioned about, before we started speaking on here, about the Knights Templar. And we're going to talk about them a little bit, but I'm going to get your opinions anyway, because we talked about Stonehenge there, and obviously, Glastonbury, that region. The Knights Templar are often, and bear with me, they're often associated with Masonic-like rituals. People, when they went into hiding, they kind of, over the course of hundreds of years, their descendants kind of show up again in Masonic lodges and as Freemasons. But going back, their ancestors, many people say that their ancestors came from essentially the families from Jerusalem and the Temple of Solomon, and they fled that, when Jerusalem was sacked by Rome in AD 70, and they show up again in various nobilities and royal houses, sometimes in England, throughout Europe. Glastonbury has connections to the real Jesus. So what I'm getting at is, do you feel that these secret societies that are around today, not specifically the Freemasons, many others, actually stretch all the way back to the mystery schools of ancient Egypt, and there's been some kind of little line passing this knowledge through, and is that why it still actually exists, just simmering below the surface today?
Gosh, that was a hell of an introduction. I'm sat here going, yes, no, yes, no,
right.
yes, no, yes, no. Because obviously I do a lot on Templars.
Yeah.
I do a huge
Yes,
amount of that.
I'd love to get your theories on this. Yeah. Oh.
Oh gosh. I mean, this next year I'll just get a plug in here. I'm doing at least 3 Templar conferences, fairly big
Excellent.
ones.
Wow.
Most of them are in Herefordshire or down that way, Somerset, Glastonbury, what have you. But I'm doing 3 because it's picking up. It's taking off now in this country as an important, significant subject. So anybody wants to find out where they are, go on Facebook. Everything I do, I just chuck onto Facebook. It's on my thread. Right, answering the question, going back to the question. Well, the answer is yes and no. Right. It's hard to say which bits of Templar mythology are based on fact. Okay, so anybody that wants to even start on this road and go down the route of Templars needs to be very aware that fact and mythology are equal in the story. That having been said, you can't argue with the fact that the Templars had the first standing army, they had the biggest navy, they were the world's first archaeologists, they were bankers, all that sort of thing. There's a huge amount of historical fact. They also had a huge amount of proper objects, real treasures, like the Turin Shroud, came from Geoffrey de Charny's family, and things like that. So there's factual hard. If you're like me, you're an archaeologist and you deal with artifacts and you deal with, sites you can go and see, there's a lot of that. Once you get off that, though, it starts to sort of unravel a little bit. It's worth saying, it's worth getting a definition in, that there are 3 types of Masons, not Masons, 3 types of Templars still existent today. One of them is the Masonic Templars. They can only really truly trace their ceremonies, their existence back to the start of Freemasonry, which was in the 16th and 17th centuries. And if you really, really want to push it, you might be able to get back to the 15th century in Scotland. And in Scotland, it's interesting because the iconography of the Knights Templar never changes. So you'll have like 1100s, 1200s, 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, 1600s. All the iconography, all the buildings, everything they're doing doesn't change. And they're out of the reach of the Catholic Church. So they're away from persecution. So there is a very, very strong possibility that that is a good thread, a good solid thread. Second type is you've got basically the independent orders. Now, the independent orders are surviving Templars who got wind of the fact that the Pope actually forgave them in 1380 and said it's a bad idea, we dissolve them, in which case they then had a choice. Either they went off as mercenaries, or they rebranded under another name, or they stayed as Templars.
Yeah.
Then you've also got to bear in mind when they were outlawed, they arrested probably 500 or so male Templars over the whole of France. Where are the female Templars? Where are all the auxiliary support staff? Where are the aged Templars? Where are the Templars that fled? There were thousands of them, not just a few hundred. They all went somewhere else. So you've got this idea that independent Templars and independent orders of knights, things like the Order of the Garter, the Order of the Fleur-de-Lis, etc., they can trace their origins back to the time of the Templars. Then you've got the third category. And the third category is an interesting one. Because the Catholics forgave them in 1380, there are now still Catholic Knights Templars. They meet in St. Peter's. They're there in the Vatican. They're there. They exist. So you've now got 3 categories that you're dealing with in modern times. You've got, like I say, you've got the Masonic, you've then got the independent, and you've then got the Catholic. Which one of those is the original, and who you believe and what legends you accept, that depends on what you discover on your journey. But they all have different quirks is the way I'd use it. And please don't get sidetracked by Dan Brown. Whatever you do, don't end up going down that one. It's fiction. Dan Brown is fiction, so don't get sidetracked.
Very easily done, though, isn't it? Because people really do not know much.
No.
I mean, what you just said about these 3 different areas of the Templars, and some people won't even know that. They just think Templars are Templars, but they're not.
No, there's well over 25 different Templar organisations on the internet that are based in America alone, most of whom don't have any pedigree. So it's difficult. I'm aware of 19 independent orders scattered across Britain, Europe. As far as the Middle East, there are at least 18 or 19 separate, all going as Knights Templar, but they all communicate. They all actually do talk to each other. I'm aware of the Catholic orders, and I'm aware of the Masonic degree as well. So there's some solidity in that.
Yeah.
How do they operate today? I mean, what's I don't mean this in a negative or malicious way, but what's their agenda? Is it similar to how we would view the Freemasons in justice, charitable, and it's, spreading knowledge? I mean, how do they operate today? If you wouldn't mind.
Broadly speaking, as I'm really after, this is a huge swipe of the brush. Freemasons generally, anything that's Masonic is charitable. Do Freemasons rule the world? Well, I think the answer is no, and you can see that after lockdown, they were hit as hard by COVID as anybody else. 2 out of 3 lodges, literally in some cases, died because they're all old people. You know what I mean? And the whole organisation imploded. It just reduced down to almost nothing. But in their defence, they don't tell you what they do, but they've put over £30 million every year into the NHS. Without them, the NHS wouldn't survive. So, as a charitable organisation, they are still phenomenal. They sort of earn respect. Anything else they get up to, well, that's open to debate. The independent orders, most of the independent orders are similar in a sense of people with common interests gathering together, and most of those are charitable, although some of them are specialist, like the Templar Pilgrimage Trust, for example, take people out to sites in Jerusalem. They have Templar sites that they can house people in and what have you, and it's all about pilgrimage. There was an organisation called the Good Templars, which started in America and came back over here, and they're a temperance movement. They're a sort of a church-based temperance organisation. So there is variety in the independent orders, and then the Catholic order. I think they're the ones that have got the most authentic pedigree. They are trying to get back to some semblance of what the original order was like. They're the ones that will be wading through the Vatican Library, all 3.5 miles of it on Dexian shelving. They'll be ploughing through that, trying to find out information and do the research. But they are essentially a religious rather than a charitable foundation. So there are differences. They're the main differences between the three.
Different.
No, I mean, off the back of that, then, and again, I don't expect you to hang your hat on this, or tar any organisation with any type of brush. But how important do you think secret societies are, not only in the modern world, but in archaeology? Because okay, we've all seen films where you've got some Mr. Big Elite and he's pulling the strings, and I know that's fiction, but we do know that a lot of these people with more money than they can spend do have an interest in collecting these things. The Third Reich, for example, which is a bit of a leap again, but they had a real interest in getting their hands on this stuff, and the American government seems to, through the CIA, or certainly did. So how important do you think secret societies are in this, in terms of sharing information, tipping off where things might be found, that kind of thing? Or is it... Well,
the Freemasons came out with a great definition. They said, we're not a secret society, we're a society with secrets. Right. And I kind of get that, because if you do enough research, you can find everything to do with the Freemasons online. It's all in the public domain. But there's no substitute for actually going through their rituals, because of the enlightenment that, physically doing it will give you. So, doing the research and toe dipping is cheating a bit. So all secret societies basically are like that. They all have some reason for existing within themselves. Most of it is personal advancement. They're trying to get their members to advance. As Steve said, there's a shed load of people out there that don't really know anything about anything. So if you're going to start somewhere, at least, if you're a businessman or you're in commerce, you could start with the Freemasons. At least you've got common, interest. You've got people there that are similar to yourself. Well, that really is how secret societies come about. But, and this is really important, because this affects everything we're talking about. Absolutely everything. If you found the Holy Grail, would you tell anybody where it was?
Oh, wow, that's a question.
Yeah, it's a question. Because I don't.
Because that is that's the real question. So all these secret societies, a lot of them are protecting, quote, protecting
Probably
something.
not. No, I think
Yeah,
it is.
exactly. Because
Yeah,
you know, you don't want herds of rampaging wildebeest trampling across it and destroying it, digging it up and
exactly. It would,
pulling it
yeah, it's not
apart.
going to
And
end well once you
no,
get that
no, it isn't.
information.
You know, which is why, for example, they're so cagey about things like the Turin Shroud, etc. Because you know, when
Yeah.
it's gone, it's gone. Most religious sites as well, especially the biblical ones, they've all been relocated to other locations. It's not a
Mm.
conspiracy; it's just to get pilgrims off the destroying the real thing.
Yeah.
And that's true right across the board. And I think that's quite valid. We could lose a tremendous amount of stuff if these guys didn't have that as an
Yeah, I
interest.
do think it needs some form of
I mean,
control.
some ordinary people have got extraordinary things as well. When I was doing television, when we did Lost Treasures back in
Mm.
the early 2000s, knocking on people's doors, the stuff they were coming out with, the stuff they had in their possession. But if some guy comes to the front door and goes, well, it's been in the family for, 500 years, well, you just leave well alone, don't you? You leave it where it is. It's not going anywhere. And
No.
that's a lot of the societies function on the same logic as that. I mean, nowadays we just want everything to be out in the open. We want to know everything about everything and it all to be there. And that isn't necessarily a good thing, right
No.
across the
Yeah,
board.
it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because it is a dilemma that because on the one hand,
Mm.
and I can see both sides of this. On the one hand, I want to see everything, and I don't mean trample all over everything and
No.
manhandle it, but out of pure interest and curiosity, I want to see everything, and I'm sure I'm not alone. On the other side of my personality, if you like, I completely understand what you've just said. That
Yeah.
people will act like that; they will destroy locations. So it's an interesting thing of how do we get that balance right? Because like we were talking about discoveries, for example, that they make the
Mm.
news and then they filter off. But if there's not an interest there at the base level, then that's exactly what will happen. So we almost need to find a way of being able to engage the public and get them to see this stuff, but also protect it as well. And I don't necessarily know what the answer is, but I'm sure you'd agree that we
Yeah.
need support from the general public to keep funding this stuff, keep thrusting it into the public arena. So I think it's something that really should be, and I'm sure they do think about this because I'm sure they do want people to see this stuff. I mean, do you think they'll ever find that balance, Mark?
Um, it's different for different objects. It's
Mm.
like the Turing Shroud, for example, they bring it out every so often and it's on display and people can see it and, the science, the testing, etc., etc. They have moved into the 21st century with that as an object.
Mm.
The Holy Grail, I mean, it's the Grail Knights still protect it. It's stuck in a church in Spain. We're pretty certain that's the right cup, so all the others are, lesser grails.
Mm.
But then you get this thing where, well, there might be more than one of them, but that's another argument. Sacred sites, they're harder to protect. They're much harder because they're physically there. People chipping little pieces off the pyramid for
I
probably
know.
for the best part of 6,000 or 7,000 years. People have been nicking bits. All the stones gone off the outside and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it's lasted this long. And,
Yeah.
and that's what people do. Pilgrims want to take a piece of that back with them. There's no human bone left in any of the catacombs in Rome because people have been nicking that for 2,000 years. And it
Yeah.
just goes on and on. So it depends on what you're dealing with. I think I don't think there's one answer fits all. I think different objects and different things. I mean, where Dead Sea Scrolls was a good example. Found by goat
Yeah.
herders. And they did a fairly good job of fishing some of that out.
Yeah.
Then the archaeologists went in and found the rest, and then it vanished, disappeared for like 50 odd, 60 odd years.
I actually also heard that sections of it were privately sold.
Oh yes, in
Auction,
fact,
and I
some
thought,
entire
like,
scrolls
what the
were.
hell? How can they do that?
But I can't. It
Well,
goes back to that secret societies and connections that people have got.
oh no, no, it wasn't like that. It was the end of the Second World War. It was in the 1940s, and people were just like, right, how much? Well, yeah, how much can I get for this? That's kind of how it went, and then it just kind of went up the tree till eventually they ended up in institutions.
Yeah.
But different people, again, different ways of dealing with things. Good example. Some of those scrolls were made available almost straight away. People didn't care. Let's have a look. Some of them, people have gone, no, we're not letting you see these things, because of the risk of damage. The argument there might be that actually the people saying no and waiting might have made the right decision,
You
because
may have done.
we've got
Yeah.
technology now that can
Yeah.
read scrolls without unrolling them.
Exactly. You don't have to
True enough.
physically damage them. I mean, of
No.
course, people will turn that into some form of conspiracy theory, of
Yeah.
course, because that's just the way we're geared. Trust in the 21st century is hard to come by when you're dealing with establishments and governments and things like that. People just not got that trust. But at the same time, they're responsible to what do we do with this? We've
Yeah.
always wanted. The fun was knowing that it may be existing out there, and then suddenly the fun ends and it becomes a serious issue once they discover it.
Yeah, how many millions of pounds a year is it going to cost for us to look after this? That's usually the first question,
Yeah.
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 With the Dead Sea Scrolls in mind, I mean, what are your thoughts on the notion that, and again, I'm not wanting to put words in your mouth, I don't want you to hang your hat on this, but for example, I've got a friend whose wife's an archaeologist, and she long said that, things are held back. You've said it yourself. It's not necessarily for nefarious purposes. There's various reasons, but they keep secrets in museums and in archaeological fields. But in terms of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which would have religious connotations, obviously, and would contradict, much of what's in the Bible, the Old and New Testament, etc. Do you think that notion is true? That do you think religion would just brush that off, or do you think it would kind of crumble, as some people maybe projecting fear saying that? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think the Vatican would have something to fear from those scrolls being made fully public?
Well, going in at the front end, the answer was yes. They basically panicked and didn't have a clue what it was going to do and what was going to come out of it. That wasn't helped by the fact that there was a lot of people guessing what was in there. So, for example, it's the opposite to what you just said. It actually supports the Bible. There's nothing in there at all that contradicts anything biblical. And the oldest by 1,000 years copy of Isaiah that exists on the planet is in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So actually, the Old Testament in particular, and the Apocrypha, because at this point there was no New Testament, is supported by the discoveries. But they didn't know that when they were going in at the sharp end. They expected all hell to break loose. Now they've come sailing out of the other end, and the translators and the various generations of people that worked on them have got to the end of it. Everyone's breathed a sigh of relief and gone, well, that wasn't as bad as we thought. And then all of a sudden you get like the Gospel of Judas pops up in a burial, in the desert. And that did upset a lot of people. Yeah. There's loads of Gnostic stuff. The Nag Hammadi library is far worse. There's all kinds of stuff in that puts dynamite under preconceived ideas. Difficult.
It really is, and you get into a bit of a spin because of the various different aspects of stories, things that weren't placed into the Bible, which are maybe separate books or not shared, and things like that. It becomes really problematic, and that's just the countries we do. About all the other countries, they've got their own writings. Some of them we don't even understand today. So but you could spend a lifetime and a half in just that area of research, wouldn't you, really?
Well, I have.
Well, no, you have.
Yeah, I have.
I
think I'm up to 55 years on the book I'm working on
though,
at the
isn't
moment.
it? Because it just end. It doesn't end. There's no end in sight.
Yeah, there isn't. Just when you think you've done it and you've got everything, and somebody digs something else up and something else comes out, and it just it tumbles and tumbles. But you can get an idea of what you're dealing with. You get some kind of framework for the material, which I think is important for anyone that's studying anything to do, anything from Babylon to Aboriginal glyphs. You've got to have a framework. Once you've got the framework in place, it then becomes relatively easy to rule stuff in and rule stuff out.
So what's your take, Mark, in regarding, the take a more sort of modern discussed phenomenon such as the UAP phenomenon, which has just been returned from the old UFOs. But there seems to be quite a recognition of the phenomena through biblical scriptures and stuff, or visual artwork. And you think to yourself, well, did they see these things and thought they were biblical at the time, and therefore they are, and they put them into drawings and tapestries, the Annunciation, in the images of that, the Christ being crucified and these objects in the sky. I'm thinking, are they trying to tell us something here, or is it just that anything that they would have seen would have just put the stamp on that it must be godly, or religion?
That's an interesting one. Something that I was going to mention when I mentioned the stretched heads. Another thing that happens is nowadays more than ever before, is you'll have the real thing and then you'll have a copy. And it's important to bear that in mind no matter what you're looking at. So when you go back in time, I mean, like you say, you go all the way back to Ezekiel's whirling wheels, and there's accounts of UFOs in Egypt, and you go all the way back to space travelers in Babylon, go back as far as you like. I'm pretty convinced that's not just legend. I think there's something going on there.
Yeah, because that's also global as well, isn't it?
It is global. So there's definitely something going on there. But then recently, that being the real thing, probably still goes on exactly the same way as it always has done. So that's okay. Then you've got what the hell's going on with all this other stuff. So you've got drones, planes, stealth. Who knows if somebody somewhere hasn't got an interdimensional time machine that they're mucking about with. Who knows? I mean, it's been 90 odd years since Roswell, so we've
a long time. That's
a long time. Call it a century since the Second World War. What were the Germans up to? So you've then got. I say it when I do the talks. I say, is it them or is it us?
That's a problem now.
Well,
isn't it?
It is in a lot of respects. So, you're looking at the Paracas stretch heads. Is it DNA or is it somebody trying to copy it?
Yeah,
well, it's like even the old writings of the Vimanas would beg that question, because
there's another one. Yeah,
they're literally saying they've got instructions on how to build this stuff.
They are crazy.
And,
I mean,
they are aerodynamically sound as well.
Yeah, the plans are incredible.
Pilots, what they have to go through, training regimes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so you've got to ask the question: is it something that's not us, or is it something that we are building and we are doing? So like the stretch heads, you can do that artificially. Vimanas, you can build them. Yeah. So you can build UFOs, stuff's coming from elsewhere, maybe. But then when you're looking at genetics, for example, like, is it something that's natural or is it something that's man-made? Where are these things coming from? Because you've always got, it just seems to be a pattern. You've got the real thing and then you've got a copy. Yeah, the genuine and the cover-up, if you like, the distraction, the smoke and mirrors. So you've somehow got to weed your way through all of this. It's like wading through porridge.
It's like modern day cargo cults, isn't it? In a sense of speaking, because these tribes that first saw a plane would build one out of sticks and straw to represent it. It's a copy.
Yeah.
And maybe we're doing that in the modern time as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I have no doubt that's what's happening. But we're so much more clever at doing that now. Because we have, technology that goes off the Richter scale, compared to what we had.
That's just what we know of. I mean, speaking of UFOs, and I want to look at UFO sites and ancient locations, but just one last thing. I want to just quickly go back to biblical legends, because I'd like to get your thoughts on this. Assuming there's a real Jesus, not necessarily what he did in the Bible, but a Jesus who was based and existed. There's a few researchers who have tied Jesus to ancient Egypt and essentially said, Ralph Ellis, I think is one of them, essentially said that, Jesus was almost like a pharaoh in waiting who had taken refuge in Israel, and that was the reference to king and stuff like that. So do you think there are any, because it fascinates me, do you think is there any credibility to such notions? Did a real Jesus exist, and was he perhaps an Egyptian pharaoh who fled Egypt? There are people that draw to the Hyksos tribe and things like that, and was he part of that? What are your thoughts on that? Have you done any research into that? Because it does fascinate me.
I mean, obviously, when I was in Egypt, I asked a few questions about the subject. Right. And the Coptic Church, which is the church out there, which are, funnily enough, the original Egyptians, who all have the little black cross on the back of the wrist here. There's about 20%, I think, of the population of them. The guy I was talking to, he just laughed and he just went, "Yeah, of course we know. We know exactly what he was doing. We know exactly where he went. Because people they just miss the idea that 3 years old, the Holy Family fled into Egypt, possibly because there were connections there with Joseph of Arimathea, Egyptian. Yeah. Yes. They fled into Egypt. He didn't come back till he was 12. Now, that means all of the formative years, the important years of Jesus' development, all of that was spent in Egypt, the entirety of it. And when he comes back, all we know is that when he gets in the Temple of Jerusalem, where he's got the best Jewish scholars in the world, he's running rings around them. He's 12 years old and he's absolutely academically pasting them. So clearly when he was in Egypt, something happened. I don't go down the Pharaoh route. I think that's pushing it further than it needs to go.
No.
But on the other hand, you know, when they're all accusing the woman of adultery and he just sits there and he's doodling in the sand, I don't think he was doodling pretty pictures or Hebrew or Aramaic. I think he was doodling hieroglyphs.
Right.
And that's why I don't think we've ever found anything written by Jesus, because I think we're looking for the wrong language. Yes, he spoke Aramaic, you know, yes, he could speak Hebrew and probably a bit of Greek and a bit of Latin, but at the end of the day, he was educated in Egypt, you know.
Yeah, the same
So-
mystery schools in Heliopolis, I think, if I'm
Oh
correct.
yeah, honestly,
So-
there's so much. The only place they didn't go, as far as I know, the Holy Family, they got to Cairo and areas like that, but they never went to Alexandria. They avoided Alexandria. But the oldest actual archaeological reference to Jesus has been found now at Alexandria.
Oh,
So it's a
unaware
cup.
of that.
Yeah, it's
Right.
a cup. It's a chalice that would have had handles on it, a ceremonial cup, and it has either by Christ the magician or by the magician Christ is scraped into the surface of it, and they reckon it's 60, 70 AD, something like that.
Wow.
But it's physical archeology, you know.
Yeah, it's proof
It's
it's
there, it's
existing,
real.
absolutely. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, like you say, maybe the notion of a pharaoh is like you say, a step too far. I find it interesting, but I don't know if the wedding at Cana would certainly suggest that Jesus was from a wealthy family. You know, the order to replenish the wine. Or, if my understanding is correct, in traditional families of that age, particularly wealthy ones, that it was the groom who had to replenish the wine. So that tells us two things. If you subscribe to that theory, that one, he was getting married, possibly to Mary Magdalene, and that they were wealthy enough to actually have wine to replenish in the first place. So, do you believe that if not a pharaoh, that he was sitting was a wealthy? You mentioned Joseph of I can't say it,
Arimathea.
yes, you mentioned that. So that's a connection again to wealth and influence. So,
Well, there's two issues there.
Right.
For all kinds of reasons that I'm not going to go into, but you'll just have to trust me on this one.
Okay.
He never married. He never married.
Right.
He never produced children. The whole Magdalene thing is based on a very, very, very dodgy translation of the Gospel of Mary.
Okay.
Again, you're into Dan Brown territory. So,
Yeah.
and for reasons which, funnily enough, the Knights Templar and a lot of other people knew and still do, you know, nobody's looking for any bloodline or anything like that. That's a completely different.
Maybe he wasn't supposed to have a bloodline.
No,
You've got
no.
to consider that, you know.
I mean, I'll give you an example of one of the things that came up recently, which kind of covers that part of the question. They had some samples of the Turin shroud, which they had frozen. They'd actually frozen them. They took the sweat, they took the blood, they took one or two other things. It's only happened very recently. It's only happened in the last year or two. And some bright spark said, well, why don't we use modern technology and get a tiny, tiny little fragment of the blood, and we'll analyze it and we'll have a look what's going on, because he was born of a virgin.
Yeah.
So it's got to be odd, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they did the analysis, and lo and behold, even though Jesus is a bloke, he hasn't got XY, he's got XX. So his blood type was XX, and even more interesting, it was the same exact identical blood type as Mary, whose ancestors are still living in Bethlehem.
Wow.
Really?
And they turned out, I think they turned out to be the Druze. It was it was a big documentary. They've done a big documentary of it. That's the latest discovery.
I hadn't heard this. I've not seen this documentary.
Oh, honestly, which
That's
of
pretty
course
incredible.
it also means if he tried to reproduce, there'd be problems. So there's also don't even go there, because there's all this thing about divine hermaphrodite and ticking every box, you know, in religion of that time. And oh boy, does that take you off in a wild direction. But that's science. It's archaeoscience, you know. And the other question in terms of his ancestry, well, both sides of his family are of the tribe of David. That's a royal ancestry to start with. Joseph of Arimathea, very rich guy, you know, trader. If you look at the Gospel of Mary and a few of the other apocryphal things, Mary grew up in the temple. So, you know, she's actually a female priestess of the Jewish line.
You don't get that in visions on Easter.
No, you don't. No, but it's there. You know, it's
like
there.
Poor people and can't go near. They're fleeing. They're worried for their lives. They don't. You can't put a roof over their head. They don't know what to do.
No, it's nonsense. It's all nonsense. At the end of the day, why would Herod try and wipe out somebody that's threatening him as a king, unless they had the right to be a king?
Exactly.
So there's a whole bucket of stuff going on there as well. But it's not, how can I put it? It's hidden in plain sight. All the information you need is hidden
Yep.
in plain sight. I mean, even in like, the old King James Bible, it's still there. You just have to know what you're looking for,
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
that's what keeps it so fascinating, I think.
I'll tell you what, I'll drop a bombshell because I love dropping bombshells.
Go for it.
Jesus, he sits there and he says to everybody, my reason for being here is to fulfill every single law, right? That's what he's here to do. He's to prove that as far as, God's laws are concerned, he can completely fulfill the Old Testament.
Okay.
Deuteronomy says, any man that breaks a virgin is married to her. That's in the law.
That's the law.
Right.
So he technically, legally, is married to his own mum. All of a sudden, Joseph disappears because he's not the real dad anyway. He vanishes.
Yeah.
Back to answering your question. That's why he had the authority at the wedding of Canaan.
Okay.
His mum, Mary, because it's Mary, his mum, that's there, says to the host, don't talk to me. Go and speak to the bloke in authority. Go and speak to, effectively, my partner, who is Jesus, who has the authority to sort this out. And you get that happening a lot because he says, the brothers and sisters of by Joseph are not his brothers and sisters. He reassigns Mary on the cross. He says to John, behold your mother, behold your son, which only somebody with authority can do that. Must have had authority. And so the list goes on and on and on. There's all the evidence is there. It's hidden in plain sight. So he would never have reproduced. He would never have took another partner because the ideal is the repetition of Adam and Eve, one on one. But the irony there is he literally did reproduce that because Eve is said to come from the rib of Adam. So he reverses that and he comes from the blood of Eve. He comes from the blood of Mary. So there's so much going on in there once you understand how the whole structure is done that it interprets itself, don't even get me started on the crucifixion, honestly. I can even tell you why the Templars were stamping on the cross because it was the wrong shape.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
That's the sort of thing we could do an entire show on. Maybe we should because it's absolutely fascinating.
It is really.
Just to take it back to the UFOs, and I know we're leaping around here, but if we start with ancient sites, well, they're all ancient sites, I suppose, but these historic locations, not all of them exclusive, but they tend to have a lot of UFO sightings. There's a famous piece of footage from on top of Temple Mount, for example, of the, so I mean, again, is there any credence to this? Do these sites maybe attract UFOs in whatever way, or is there a reason they're going there? Is it for energy? What are your thoughts on that?
I think statistically, sky watchers tend to gravitate towards ancient sites, hills, stone circles, etc. So statistically, there are probably more people gazing at the sky from those locations. Right. I mean, I'm only guessing, but there's probably as many that are seen from other sites, people filming them out the bedroom window and this, that, and the other, because they are universal now. UFOs are everywhere, be it everything from triangular stealth bombers, all the way through to proper UFOs, because I'm still convinced they're out there. The real thing is out there. I don't know in ancient times what the connection would have been necessarily. Interesting that a lot of the prehistoric stuff is circular. It's it's in that shape. Whether or not they were aware of what was flying around or not, I don't know. I really don't know. I'm 50-50 on that one. That's the first thing you've asked me where I'm kind of in the middle. Right. There isn't really enough evidence to say because all the accounts and all the depictions of ancient UFOs are not directly linked to ancient sites. They usually appear in other contexts.
That's a fair enough point. I mean, like you say, there is certain evidence that these things have been appearing for thousands of years. I mean, not just in biblical writings. I mean, I always use the example of the Romans, who were meticulous record keepers, as I'm sure you know, and they document several. I mean, I know some of these are down to interpretation. I get that, but like literally talking of shields flying in the sky and glowing, noises, and so there does appear that this presence has been. So, I mean, are we talking of a presence that is the same presence that's just been here for thousands of years, in your opinion, or are we seeing different visitors coming in from all over the place?
Well, a lot of people sort of have different ideas on that. They say, well, they're coming from another planet, they're extraterrestrial, they're visiting Earth that way, or they're coming from another dimension, so they're popping in and they're popping out, they're popping in and they're popping out. Or maybe they're time travelers, or whatever.
Yeah.
I kind of sat down one day and really, really paid attention to the evidence and thought about this. And I thought, okay, if you're coming from the future and you're traveling back in time, you've got this thing where you could screw up your own existence. You could end up doing something.
Yeah, the paradox.
It's the paradox, So let's rule that out. You've then got this world that's covered in debris and there's stuff going on in the Van Allen belt, and we don't really understand space. There's so many things going wrong there. If you were trying to fly in, you would have a lot of trouble. You'd end up getting hit by all kinds of objects before you got anywhere near planet Earth.
Very dangerous place, space.
Extremely dangerous. Then you start thinking, okay, what about dimensions, time travel? Start going down the Tesla, the Einstein, all that sort of avenue. And then I thought to myself, hang on a minute, I'm missing a trick here. Back to exactly where we started with this conversation. If Atlantis had all that Atlantis had, so it had language, maths, structure, species, etc. What happens if they crack time and space? What happens if these guys with enormous supercomputer brains, they all get together and go, right, we understand how time and space operates.
Yeah.
Well, there'd be nothing wrong with them being time travelers, but maybe they're not from the future. Maybe they're from the extremely distant past. So what they're doing is they're going forward to see what's going on, to find out where the planet ends up and how it evolves or devolves, which then in one foul swoop, that just explains everything: your abductions, your strange tests, your animal mutilations, the way they arrive and disappear, and so on and so on. It just seems like a nice rounded idea. So I'm going to go down that one. I'm going to answer the question by nailing my colours to the mast and say I think they're actually time travelers. So things like physical objects and debris and space and all that doesn't bother them at all. They just dive in at their end and pop out at our end. And
I always thought that
I think that's
when the extraterrestrial hypothesis came out many years ago, and I was like, okay, I could understand there could be life out there visiting planet Earth, because we would do the same thing. But then I thought, well, they're demonstrating super advanced technologies. Surely they'd found a better way to traverse the universe.
Yeah, you're also suffering from what I used to call the Star Trek problem, the Star Trek anomaly, which is it has one head, two eyes, a mouth, two arms, a body.
That's the problem.
Two legs, feet and hands, because that's all they could afford, in the budget. That's what aliens look like,
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
And that's what these guys look like.
But it does fit really well as well, because many mainstream scientists, again, I keep using that phrase, but they will say, in theory, it's almost easier to travel forward, but almost impossible to travel back. So that kind of fits in there nicely as well. I mean,
I think it does. You kind of, if you get someone that ticks all the boxes, chances are you're barking up the right tree. That's kind of how I'm looking at it, and I think that's what we're dealing with. And these guys are miles ahead of us, but we've got this horrible idea that things were really primitive in the past, so they can't possibly be coming from the past, but as this interview's shown, that clearly isn't the case. It's not true. So maybe back in the days, Fangia had some portals or whatever, you're into Stargate theory and stuff like that now, and maybe they just disappear from that time period and reappear in ours.
Yeah, certainly connections with consciousness. Consciousness seems to be a spirituality, and consciousness is connection with all over the world from ancient times. So there obviously was something about that. But then I consider that modern day humans have probably forgotten or lost stuff that we may have been able, our ancient ancestors were capable of doing. I mean, we can clearly see they were picking up the capabilities of magnetic energies, and because we know with lasers and we think, well, they didn't have EMF meters and magnetic meters back then. How did they know and were so accurate? And this goes up, it's the whole world, actually. It's like a world grid. They knew where to build ancient sites on that scale of the world. That's an incredible feat.
Well, the one that always tickles me up is the Great Pyramid of Giza, and everyone does the grid and they do all this, that, and the other. But physically, if you take dry Earth and you take it north-south, and then you take the rest of the dry Earth as far as landmass is concerned, it is absolutely the dead center.
I know it's. How did he know this?
It
Yeah.
really is.
You know?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think we could have got it any better now with the
Again,
technology.
it just shows absolute advancement in antiquity. Let's
Yeah.
quickly get your thoughts on this, because you've kind of said what you think anyway. So I'm not expecting you to suddenly change your opinion, but and I don't necessarily think I subscribe to this either. But is it possible that you're correct? These UFOs are survivors of Atlantis. What are your thoughts on that they escaped into an inner Earth? And I know that sounds preposterous and blah blah blah. And so I'm not saying I buy it or I want you to buy it, but is it possible? And that explains why maybe UFOs are seen near and around the sea quite a lot. That they're using the waterways to traverse the planet. And is it even possible that they could survive in an inner Earth? I mean, I know recently there was a discovery of an ocean inside the planet, so there is clearly more for us to discover there. At the very
Well, there's been discoveries made about the planet, so you're absolutely right. There's 2/3 of the water on the planet is trapped in the rocks.
Yeah.
In the planet, there's more water down there. Same goes for oil. So that the problem they had with the Earth's core being metal and it didn't work. They now know the Earth's core is made from quartz, possibly amethyst. It's quartz crystal. Solved Olson's paradox. So there's a lot going on down there. There's a huge amount of stuff happening in the planet. And the other piece of information is that it's very hard for us as human beings to actually conceive how big the planet is.
Yeah.
I mean, if I just say it's flipping enormous, it's bigger than we're not even fleas on a dog's back, compared to the size of the planet. Yeah. So I'm not going to rule out the idea that they could be popping in and out of something. They could be living north or south pole. There might be holes. There could be goodness knows what else. That might be some kind of a massive cover up. Who knows? I have looked at that. I've examined that, and I've just thought, well, the Earth is so big. And there's so many things that have been shown to be hiding from us that there is the possibility that they might be here and hiding from us as well.
Yeah.
But I still think that the key of it is in frequency and dimension.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's we're just not wired to see what they are when they're around, and that goes for a huge amount of stuff. I think it's only 0.03% of the light spectrum, the radio spectrum, and everything else. Our senses are just not wired for that, which is becoming more and more apparent with the development of technology. So absolutely, there's no reason why they couldn't be here hiding somewhere. I can't rule that one out.
It's fascinating stuff, Stephen. We were on speaking last week to Brad Olson about the Hollow Earth and the Inner Earth. So, it is certainly a possibility. But I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Steve? Your thoughts?
Oh, sorry. I mean, Inner Earth thing. I mean, Agartha, the Mera, Shambhala. The stories are all over the world of inner Earth, and then basically you talk about advanced ancient civilizations. There's written documentations of certain Indian temples in India, top of mountains, which hide exotic advanced technologies under the floors. And there's so many of these stories. But it's not the stories that interest me. It's that it's so widespread. Because the old theory that we can't travel too far, we might fall off the edge of the earth. It's just preposterous, I mean, it's clearly they all knew the earth was round. They were traversing, and then they realized, well, hang on, they were trading with each other. They knew that their existence of each other, and you think to yourself, well, really, we really have taken a massive step back in our education. So that must have been lost because it's not been passed to modern humanity. We're scrambling to find the truth. So something must have happened. I think significant catastrophes have slowly just chunked out of knowledge being passed on. And I think that we're not dealing with something new. We're actually trying to learn something that's very old, I think. And I think there's a lot more answers that lie that direction in the past than there is of what's going on in the future.
It's like the Greeks. The Greeks had pi, so they could calculate the circumference of the Earth within, a very short distance. Well, that's what 2,500, 3,000 years ago. They've just discovered that the Babylonians and the Sumerians had
How
pi.
far back does this go?
So that's like 7,500, 8,000 BC. That's 10,000 years ago.
Can't imagine it, can
absolutely, Like you say, it goes around in circles. People rediscover these things and they, come back into use.
Absolutely
It's
fascinating.
fascinating, isn't it? Really,
It really
there's
is.
so much. This is, that's what so surprises me is that we live in a world of secrets, wonder, knowledge, all sorts of strange things, and it's absolutely in abundance.
Mm.
It really is.
Mm.
And don't get me wrong, I mean, I do think that people have pioneered areas and think, wow, this is really fascinating, but we got to keep it secret because we want to use it for ourselves, and that's power, because it's always been for a very long time. The guy with the biggest stick wins, and it's always, and it's always been that ruling. But when you start sort of looking into religion and, and gods and little g's and big G's and all those sort of things, you have to start looking into it because a lot of people now are looking back in antiquity and saying, well, are the little g's what we are experiencing in modern day now? Because when you talk about NHI, a lot of people are saying, well, when you listen to their experiences, it's like they've got godly powers. It's like, wow, it levitated and it walked across this water and it did this, that, and you're thinking to yourself, it's like godly power they've got. I wonder if what is all that representation, or is it sort of little g's, because these references that, biblical documents have called it to God as opposed it used to be gods and this and the other. In your mind, a lot of people are asking those questions now. What's it all mean with it tying into the past and the document?
Yesterday's angels are today's aliens.
Exactly.
Well, it kind of leads nicely in. I mean, we'll have to wrap this up. So it leads nicely into my last question. What I'm going to get your thoughts on, actually, Mark. Obviously we've leaped around between the ancient past and paranormal UFOs. Would you like to, or do you think it would be beneficial? Is a better way of saying this, to see fields of interest such as archaeology, whether it's ancient or archaeology or. Well, I suppose that all archaeology is ancient, but would you like to see archaeology in different fields of interest, including UFO researchers and, paranormal investigators? Would you like to see them coming together to try and give a fuller, rounder picture of all of this stuff? Because there are seemingly connections between mysteries of the ancient past and, as you say, strange goings on in the modern era. Would you like to see that? And do you think that will ever happen?
I suppose the short answer is yes and yes, but to some extent it's already happened and is already happening.
Right.
Like really what it's down to is each individual human being's capabilities. Because, for example, I know 80%, for example, of archaeologists, professional archaeologists, are also dowsers. They won't tell you that, but they dowse. It's a skill. The same is probably true of farmers. It's probably higher. The percentage will be higher with farmers. They know because they are working with the ground, the earth, the planet, stuff that's buried. And that's the kind of skill that you pick up. Well, the same thing, for example, with Steve. He's dealing with perhaps interdimensional beings and entities and ghosts and things like that. But we've just mentioned now that there's a crossover there with religion. It's going in that direction. What's going on in the religious sphere? So each one of us in our own way will be, mixing and matching and seeing what we come up with, which in the 21st century, absolutely, that is the way forward. That has to be the way that things are going. We have to sort of get rid of this in the box mentality. Break that asunder, as it were. And the more professionals that do that, and the more people that are in possession of a significant amount of knowledge that do that, the further we'll advance and the faster. It's got to be. You've got to be a generalist. The answer is in many different things, not just in one. Yeah, so
I couldn't have said that any better myself. I mean, that is exactly how it is, and it needs to move forward. The problem is now we've got people with pushing their own agendas and using a very highly resourceful tool as the internet to spread disinformation. And like Mark said before, you really got to sort of go to the grindstone and really do the research to work out what is you could have wasted years just on finding this is disinformation. Well, okay, you've just spent years working at this bit is not true, and we're really what we want is the truth. But we've got an extra problem now is we've got distruths. We've got things that aren't true.
Yeah, that's the real conspiracy. That if there's a cover up, That's the real conspiracy.
Mix it all together in a big pot and it's chaos.
It is. It's an absolute minefield. I mean, Mark, look, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Really, genuinely has been fascinating. So thanks ever so much for joining us, first of all. What have you got coming up? And you mentioned you're doing some Knights Templar talks. Have you got any other things? The floor's yours, my friend.
Right, okay, I'll do the usual advert. I only do 3 things, really, that is technological. One is, if you want any of my books, they're all on Amazon. Just go and order them. They're all there.
Even that monster thing that you
wrote. The Polychronicle of Merlin, Joseph and Arthur. That only took 45 years to get into print. That's a hell of a book. But if you do order that one, try and get the hardback. It's better than the softback. It's only a couple of quid more. The second thing is, if you want me, I'm on Facebook. I'm not anywhere else. I'm just on Facebook. If you message me on Messenger, we can get into emails and stuff from there. But Facebook, that's the main point of contact. And I'm all over YouTube. There's tons of stuff on YouTube. So that's the third thing. If you want to have a look at back catalogue, I've finally managed to get everything up there. So it's all up there somewhere. You'll find it all on YouTube. So that's the advertising out of the way. In terms of what's coming up, 2026, it's just gone mental. I've got major events coming up in terms of the Templars. There are 3 conferences, one in the spring, one in the summer, and one in the autumn. But I'm also working at a Viking Longhouse, which is also a live music venue. It's run by progressive rockers. So it's music meets archaeology. You know, I'm not the only one out there.
Wow.
And there's at least 5 events taking place there right through the year. So that's, a shed load of work just there. I'm on tour again at the end of the year, do speaking engagements. If you want to know where, that will pop up around about July, August on my Facebook. So I'm doing that. I'm just busy all the time, and podcasts, loads of podcasts. Yeah. So I'm always doing stuff. And then I've got 3 books on the go as well, which will
one's not enough, no.
No. Well, I've got 9 in print. If you go and have a look, there's 9 of them.
Right. So, I know what you're saying, a writer's always got about 4 or 5 manuscripts half complete and nearly complete, so I'm with you there.
And I forgot to mention as well, I've just filmed for a television series that I'm sworn to secrecy on. I'm not supposed to tell anyone, so you know what I'm like. Like you do. So, it's called Beyond Myth. And it's coming up, and it's looking at the Holy Grail, it's looking at Atlantis, it's looking at all sorts of things.
It's very interesting. I talked with, was it Tom? I think his name.
Yeah, it's Tom. Yeah,
it's Tom, and I talked to him, and he said, "Look, Steve, we've seen that you've done some bits in archaeology," and I said, "No, I've done nothing in archaeology." Well, we've seen that you've done TV shows on alien, ancient stuff. I said, "Yeah, little bits and bobs." I said, "I am no expert." I said, "You need to be talking to Mark Olly." And he says to me, "Oh, but Mark Olly's involved." I went, "Oh."
Yeah,
there you go then.
Well,
don't involve me. That's not my forte.
Yeah, some secret that turned out to be. Anyway, eventually when it comes out, you'll be able to watch
brilliant.
me.
It does sound like it's going to be very good, to be honest.
Yeah, the production team, Tom and his team, were excellent. They were absolutely outstanding. We had a really, really good time putting the episodes together. Loads of fun. Excellent. So let's hope it takes off.
I think it will. I think it'll be.
I think it will. Yeah.
Well, looking forward to seeing it for sure. Mark, look, listen, thank you. You've been a brilliant guest. It's been brilliant speaking to you. We definitely would like to get you back on. I want to say that now, getting some of that religious stuff, because that is fascinating. We can delve into that, I'm sure. And just thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Absolute pleasure. I'm here if you need me.
Excellent.
We'll keep in touch, buddy.
Definitely be back in touch. And thank you guys for joining us. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Make sure you leave any thoughts in the comments, and make sure that you follow us on social media. Also check out the anomalyprojectpodcast.com for further news, articles and information. Until next time, goodbye and take care.